Serious, those of you who worked undercover, what is the most taboo thing you witnessed, but could not intervene as to not blow your cover? When I worked QA for a video game publisher, they had me work an E3 as a secret player. Basically I got to play new games for that publisher and act like they were amazing in front of press. While I was taking a break I saw one of the producers hooking up with a booth babe. He didn't recognize me, but I knew he was married and had a kid on the way. I didn't say crap. He got laid off when the rest of us did about a year later, but that's just kinda how E3 goes. Couple showed up to a party with their kids, boy about 11, girl around 9, get paid by host, have kids do it with each other for entertainment of some of the people present. For further tips let a couple sickers join in after a few minutes. Kids have been safely wards of the state for several years now for your information. I wasn't exactly undercover, but there was a degree of subterfuge involved. When I was working in the customer service department of a health insurance company, I had a call one day that was just a little off. The guy was calling from a pharmacy about a problem with his prescription. That was the normal part. The red flag was his demeanor. He was agitated, as anyone would be in that situation, but he was being overly polite. Normally in this situation, even a very tolerant person would still have some choice words for his insurance carrier. Not this guy. Everything was yes, sir, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, sir. It just didn't quite fit. To better assist him, I asked him what prescription he was trying to fill, the dosage, and the quantity. He was getting oxy, maximum quantity, maximum dosage. The plot thickens. So I asked him to hold while I checked with our pharmacy vendor to see if they could shed some light on the issue. What I was actually doing was having my team lead research the guy. It took a while, so I had to keep coming back to the call to ask the guy if he wouldn't mind waiting just a little longer. That's not a problem at all, sir. I don't mind waiting one bit. At this point, he was starting to sound anxious, still very polite. What my team lead found was that the guy was getting prescriptions for basically every narcotic under the sun filled at different pharmacies all over town. And so was his wife. Maximum dosage, maximum quantity. The reason he couldn't get this particular prescription filled is because our pharmacy vendor flagged his policy and it was under review. That flag had just been placed that very morning, but they hadn't had a chance to take any action just yet. By this point, I've got my team lead on the phone with the pharmacy vendor, my supervisor on the phone with our internal fraud investigators, and my manager on the phone with an Leo in the guy's jurisdiction. Just before the call ended, I heard the cop walk up next to him, address him by his full name, and tell him to hang up the phone. He and his wife got dinged for numerous counts of distribution and insurance fraud. The director of our fraud unit invited me to her office to thank me for being proactive. She also talked to me about going to school to become a fraud investigator. That director is now a VP, and I still get a high five from her when I pass her in the halls. A few years back we got a tip that a guy who owned an advertising agency in the area and was also running funding in lab. We got to his assistant who was hilariously into the whole thing. I'm guessing many years of verbal abuse from a dickhead will fan the flame of revenge. We would be alerted when he left the office each day where he'd pick his 2 daughters up from a fancy Catholic school and sometimes swing by what we eventually confirmed was the lab. They would wait in the car while he was inside for about an hour. Occasionally the daughters would leave the car and go somewhere. We assumed in the beginning that it was to get something to eat as they often came back with a bag of food. But there was a McDonald's a block over and this was a nice white paper bag, not a plastic one from a convenience store. A small thing but it just seemed odd. One day they were followed and it out they were friends with the daughter of another guy who owned a restaurant and worked as the hostess. Apparently she figured out that surprise, well-to-do men will pay good money to frick young pretty girls. The 2 sisters' girls would wait behind the building, then the hostess would come out with 3-5 guys usually in suits and take everyone down to the basement of another building restaurant guy used for storage. When they came out the guys went directly to their cars or walked to the train. The girls would go inside the restaurant and come out with that white paper bag. We busted M guy eventually but the girl's business wasn't our problem. My partner reported it and eventually someone followed up. Through casual conversation rumors I've heard they made $300 per guy and the whole thing had been going on for 7 months. Supposedly it was the youngest of the two sisters who had an IQ off the chart and masterminded the entire operation. Neither father had any idea what was going on and the girls were between 12 and 15. As I was strictly involved with observation evidence gathering on M-Man, the girls' business was handled elsewhere and due to their ages the case files are sealed well above my pay grade. One day though, it will be a fascinating read. Supposedly it was the youngest of the two sisters who had an IQ off the chart and masterminded the entire operation. I bet you she and her sister were physically shamed before this happened. Kids don't come up with perverted crap like this on their own. From 2007 through 2008 I worked on a smuggling interdiction task force. My team dealt with human trafficking. My job was all balls and I regret that we couldn't really do anything to put a dent in the problem. I worked undercover in that I did not wear a uniform or carry a badge and my authority was civilian, so I only reported to LEAs. The most taboo thing I witnessed that I was not allowed to do anything about was women, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, offering children for sex in exchange for cash. The truth of the matter is that, at least in Western society, the threshold of evidence required to hold women responsible for sex trafficking is not even in the same ballpark as for men. The number of cases we had to tolerate sickens me. I don't know which we need to address first as a society, the rampant abuse or the gender bias that keeps it going. But the truth be told, I met just as many women pimps and abusers as I did men. The biggest difference I could see is that women were more often pimping out the under 12 demographic versus the male pimps that were pimping out the teens. I never saw one female prosecuted, but we were successful in moving a handful of kids to foster care. Working as a PI, without giving too many details, I was a part of a drug-happy orgy a pair of unfit parents set up. Had my partner do the drugs off camera with the excuse of me having a drug test for my job so I couldn't partake in that. 10 plus people there, mostly in couples, and I ended up screwing the unfit mother and recorded her getting sandwiched at her home and plenty of other things. Needless to say, the kids aren't in that house anymore. Ended up quitting after that job. Kinda fricked with my head. The money was kind of ridiculous at times though. It was a custody case. The children went with their bio father who had been fighting for them for a long time. I've had to do some forensic PC work. Seen bodies mishandled by funeral staff, psychologists molesting their patients, veterinarians torturing animals, dentists killing children with unnecessary anesthesia, doctors filling a man's chest with metal stents for no reason, older doctors that are clearly incompetent cutting up some poor guy indiscriminately. I know I see the worst of the worst, but it is enough to make me not want to go to a medical professional until I absolutely have to. Even then it is iffy. All of these cases have the full attention of legal authorities. All of them took place several years ago. Anyone who could be charged has been charged. Worked as a private investigator for a while. Mostly did work comp cases. Seen some shiftiness, drug deals, etc. Worst thing was conducting surveillance on a person at an apartment complex. Get there before light to set up my rig. Little bit before sunrise this Mexican couple, 50s-ish, in a truck pull up in front of my position. Guy's pulling a trailer. Gets out rummage through dumpster for metal and stuff. Okay, not so bad. Then the woman with him gets out and between my vehicle and said dumpster proceeds to pop a squat and crap on the ground. Way to start my morning guys. Thanks. She's just getting swifty. I was working a detail a few years back in the Parks district of our county. We've had complaints and issues with men engaged in carnal activity in vehicles and restrooms. I volunteered to be a decoy with a wire to see if the issue was out of hand. I was hanging out in my vehicle and decided to go near the men's restroom for a bit. It wasn't long when a vehicle with out of county plates parked, an elderly gentleman driving. I kept my position at the restroom entrance when he walked up. I could tell he wasn't there to use the restroom. He chose the first stall and acted as if he had to urinate. Then I heard it. He was masturbating pretty vigorously and the sound was awful. He leaned back out of the stall to see if I was still there. I wanted to get the heck out of there, the look on his face, licking his lips with drool running down his chin. I'm not quite clear of the conversation, but he either finished or lost interest. As he was walking out of the restroom, he reached out and grabbed my twig and berries. I froze, was shocked and didn't know what to do from there. My partners were in an enclosed garage watching and listening to the entire thing. After running this guy's information, it came back the car belonged to a diocese out of Dayton, Ohio, and the elderly male was the priest. I never volunteered for that crap again. This is kinda boring, but I was told to join a specific gang in college to leak info about it so that they could be removed from college. Kids of rich peeps. It turns out they used to regularly frick teen girls, sometimes even as young as 12, and used to give them drugs instead of money so that the girls would come around for more. I thought it was quite serious, so I gave all this information when I was about to pass out. My college is now closed for 1 year for suspected drug distribution. I worked for a large retailer doing internal loss prevention. I'm not the same guy that follows shoplifters around a store. I investigated the actual employees, including managers and warehousing employees and their supervisors. I would enter the store as a new hire or a transfer. A common issue was items missing from the loading dock. Most of the time it was employees stealing things and selling it out the back door. In one town in Iowa, I had to befriend a guy who was stealing a large amount of electronics. He just had a kid and stuff, so it was a bit hard. He asked if I wanted in. I'm not going to say how he was doing it, but it resulted in him removing surveillance to enter the electronics room and steal iPods and stuff. He was caught with the surveillance equipment in his car. Meanwhile, he was a store loss prevention guy that followed around shoplifters. By paying him, he would intentionally place himself at the opposite end of a store while someone would come in and leave with an abnormal amount of small resellables. Another was to inspect groups or theft rings. People who steal specific things from several stores in an area for resale. We would then often find these items for sale online. The 60-day World of Warcraft cards were a big one. Shaving razor blades, PC games, DVDs were an issue until they completely lost their value, and cosmetics. One time I had to follow a guy around for a week while he placed UPC labels for low value items on expensive items. He printed the UPC labels at home and put them on specific items. An accomplice, a shopper, would then find that exact item, pay at the register like normal with about $50 in random items at peak hours. This went on for about 2 years. This guy had over $700k in sales on his eBay account for a 2-year time period. Turns out he was doing this at 6 stores with 6 employees. Truth is though, these 7 people weren't even a drop in a bucket in regards to shrinkage. More like a drop in a well. 25 years ago, give or take, I did some work as a private investigator. Someone I knew did it as a side job out of a large law firm's office, and he hired me to help him out. Lots of interviewing witnesses to something that may have happened several years ago and stuff like that. One night I had to drive about 45 minutes out into the country to interview someone involved in a possible DUI incident where he ran a stop sign and severely injured someone. I posed as someone from his law office and never let on that I was working for the victims. I thought myself pretty sneaky for doing that. As we're sitting there and I'm asking some roundabout questions hoping not to tip him off, he just goes and tells the whole story of how drunk he was, how much he had been drinking, where he had been drinking, and tons of other details. As I'm listening to this, I'm thinking that if he finds out I'm from the other side of the case, he could kill me pretty easily. I quickly ended the interview, drove a couple towns over and wrote down everything he said in more details and turned it into the lawyers the next day. Tried to answer some questions below. This was late 1980s. I had zero training, was probably 20 years old, had no knowledge of anything law related, etc. I have no idea if what I learned was ever used, or even given to the attorneys. It could have been that the pie who I was helping out said what everyone here has said and just never told the law firm about it. I have no idea. After realizing how stupid it was of me to be out doing this, alone, with no one knowing where I was or what I was doing, and the fact that no one had given me any sort of training or guidance, I never went back to the office again and instead just focused on trying to build my freelance photography career. Pi here was in a crappy neighborhood and saw a guy beat his girlfriend pretty badly. Made an anonymous tip to the police, but they got there way too late and the GF ended up going back to the guy anyway. I watched an 8-year-old boy get punched in the face by his mother who was about to sell me an ounce of MJ. We waited as long as we could to not burn the CI, then locked her up on both charges even though I wanted to bash her face and right there. Not anywhere near cop or spy level, but was once hired by a music retailer to see how much attention his staff were paying to theft. By shoplifting his store, while legally ripping off the store, I saw a guy I knew watching me, and clearly encouraged by my blatant behavior, he proceeded to do the same. I don't know if this counts, but when I was in high school over 15 years ago I worked at a KFC. The manager wanted me to keep an eye out on workers and report back to her. She wanted to know who was stealing boxes of stuff, potato and gravy, chicken salt, etc. She conveyed that my actions would be looked upon very favorably and perhaps even led to a better position eventually, like management, if I acted as spy. I told the guy who was doing it that I was meant to be a spy. He thanked me and gave me 5 big bags of chicken salt, heaps of coleslaw and potato and gravy. I got so sick of that crap so quick that I gave most of it away to my relatives. I lived in a pretty poor working class area, so did my relatives, so they were stoked cause they loved KFC. I don't think she found out what we did, so I guess I didn't blow my cover as a double agent. I used to training at a call center. I always included being aware of social engineering attempts in my role plays. Management liked this so much they started having me do this as a secret caller. I hate to say, but I got a lot more people than I should have. Even started doing it ad hoc for other divisions when word got round. Worst was an agent that I'm not sure if she really just didn't care or was just so overly helpful she didn't think twice. But man, I could have stolen 3 or 4 people identities if I was actually running a scam. This looks like something Subreddit Simulator would say. I finally have one. I was JTF6 and we covertly patrolled for drug harvesting activity, aka drug plots. My partner and I had eyes on this one location. We had to observe them for a period of time to generate a decent salute report. We see this wild butt road warrior looking kid come hauling butt up on his dirt bike with who we thought was his mom or grandma. Then we witness some incestuous or at the very least underage relations by the feral kid and the she beast he brought with him. The whole time we're just sitting there in our hide, grossed out and unable to move or intervene, or we'd blow our cover and the whole op. Didn't really care to intervene on this, but I was happy to include it in my report. I'm a mystery shopper and the manager say these 2 really attractive models at prime seats by the bar. Throughout the meal he went behind the bar to make them drinks without ringing them up, took pictures with them, and was overall really obnoxious. I think he even got their phone number. They were obviously using him for free stuff. For this class of restaurant I am supposed to identify the manager and see them make contact with 3 or more tables. All drinks and definitely supposed to be rung through the pose. I was happy to put this in my report. I live in Miami, though, and I see this crap happen regularly. The rest of the people get treated like this. Another, I got my oil changed and the guy calmed me on it. I felt bad and didn't want to get the guy in trouble, so I took the hit in the system for not turning in a report. I guess I'm as bad as the girls. I was having a really bad week and I guess he could see that. One last. My boyfriend and I do the mystery dinners and we normally go to fairly expensive restaurants. We're in our mid-20s and stand out as fairly young and not as wealthy compared to the rest of the crowd. We usually get service that is watered down when you can hear the red carpet being rolled out to the older couple next to you. What is funny is that we will tip better than a lot of those people, as most of our friends are in the service industry and we know how it goes. But treat us poorly and we tip poorly. I know how I should be treated when I'm paying $100 head. Not too big of a deal, but watched a guy get jumped a couple days ago by 4 teenagers, took his bag of booze, wallet and beat him for a few seconds before riding their bikes away. Entire incident was less than 30 seconds. I was working UC as a Leo. I worked as an undercover operative for a private investigation firm. I don't think I saw anything taboo, but there was definitely some stuff going on that was notable. I was once placed at a soft drink bottling facility on the graveyard shift as a mechanic. My job was to keep the motors lubed on all the conveyor belt systems and so forth. I knew nothing at all about that line of work, but the PI firm got me into the union job using false records and a little string pulling by the plant president. My official job was to look for employee frick-ups. There were plenty. Drinking on the job was the main frick-up. Friday nights, especially, out back of the loading docks is where we kept the wooden pallets. Hundreds of them stacked in about 20-foot high columns. Friday nights we'd take the forklifts and create a hidden pathway in the middle of the stacks where we'd sneak in ice chests full of beer. Throughout the night, we'd shuttle people in and out of the hidden area so they could drink, forklift them in and circle back a few minutes later with a new crew to drop off while returning the imbibed back to their stations. Night boss had no idea. He was usually passed out drunk in his office. Oh, I finally had to have a clandestine meeting with the plant president to let him know that, due to my ignorance on what my phony job actually entailed, he better get somebody in there to lube those machines before crap started breaking down. I was placed at a winery once. Hardest work I've ever done. The owner's son ended up being the biggest hemp dealer in the area, running the whole operation from the winery. I was once also placed in an office setting for a sweepstakes company. There wasn't much going on there. Pretty boring. However, I did end up in a threesome with the boss's secretary and her friend, so there's that. Sounds like you. Puts on sunglasses. Won the lottery with that last one. I work in compliance for factories in Asia. The main focus of my job is to make sure the factories are following rules set by who contacts them to make something. I let a group of about 30 work overtime after they all stood outside my office asking why I am not allowing them to make more money before the upcoming holiday. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.